Let's get right into it. Number 10. The roommate you never agreed to. There's a voice in your head right now. And before you close this video in a mild panic, no, that doesn't make you unusual. What does make it unusual is that this voice has opinions. Strong ones. It has preferences about your outfit, commentary on your life choices, and occasionally a full breakdown of every embarrassing thing you've ever said at a party, unprompted at 2 in the morning while you were just trying to sleep. Here's the part that actually breaks people's brains. That voice isn't exactly you. Or at least, it's not the conscious you sitting here watching this video. Psychologists have been chipping away at this for decades, and what they've found is genuinely unsettling in the best way. Your inner monologue, that running commentary narrating your entire existence, operates with a kind of independence that doesn't really match the unified self-story we like to tell ourselves. Think of it this way. You didn't hire this voice. You didn't write its script. You didn't approve its tone. And yet, there it is every morning before your coffee, already forming sentences, already judging the day. Some people describe their inner voice as warm and encouraging, like a supportive coach. Others describe it as basically a lawyer who hates them and is building a case. The wild thing, both versions feel completely natural because you've been listening to that specific voice your whole life. Psychologist Charles Ferneyhoff, who has basically dedicated his career to the science of inner speech, describes it not as a monologue at all, but as a kind of internal dialogue, a conversation between different positions inside your own mind. Which sounds poetic until you realize that means you've been having a group chat with yourself this entire time, and one of the accounts is kind of passive-aggressive. Basically, the voice in your head isn't your inner self. It might be your inner cast. Number 9. It has a different vocabulary than you do. Here's something that should make you deeply suspicious of your own mind. Have you ever caught your inner monologue using a word you would never say out loud? Like, in real life, you're a perfectly normal person who says things like, sounds good, and, yeah, for sure. But internally, you're apparently some kind of Victorian essayist. What a profoundly disappointing turn of events. Your brain whispers about spilling cereal. This is not a quirk. This is a clue. Research into inner speech has found that the language your brain uses internally often differs from the language you use externally, in vocabulary, in formality, and sometimes even in the emotional register entirely. People who speak multiple languages report this even more dramatically. They'll think in one language when doing math, shift to another language when processing an emotion, and then have their inner monologue respond in a third language entirely, basically hosting a United Nations debate inside their skull about whether to text their ex back. But even for monolingual people, the gap between inner speech and outer speech is real. Researchers believe this is partly because inner speech is condensed. Your brain skips a lot of the grammatical scaffolding it uses for external communication because it doesn't need to explain itself to itself. Except sometimes it does anyway, in full sentences, with punctuation. This suggests the inner voice has developed its own communication style, independent of your social persona, your work voice, your talking to your parents' voice. It's not performing for anyone. And a voice that doesn't perform? That's a voice with a real personality. Number 8. It's meaner to you than literally anyone else is. Nobody on earth talks to you the way your inner monologue does. Your worst critic, your most passive-aggressive coworker, your most disappointed relative. None of them come close, because they have to look you in the eye. Your inner voice? No such restriction. It is operating in a consequence-free zone with a lifetime of personalized ammunition. You make a minor mistake at work, and the voice goes, asterisk, of course you did. Classic you. This is so on brand. Asterisk, you have a slightly awkward conversation with a stranger, and before you're even out the door, it's already replaying the whole thing in slow motion with critical annotations. You trip on a flat surface, and it offers a full philosophical assessment of your existence. Psychologists call this pattern negative self-talk. But that phrase is too soft for what it actually is, which is a deeply personalized psychological attack from someone who has watched your entire life and specifically knows every weak spot. And the cruel irony is that this voice often sounds like reason. It doesn't feel like an attack. It feels like clarity, like finally being honest. That's because the inner monologue has a trick. It borrows the voice of authority. Studies show that much of our internal negative self-talk echoes the cadence of critical figures from our past: parents, teachers, early authority figures, and gets mistaken for our own rational judgment. So you're not being hard on yourself. You're being haunted by a composite ghost of everyone who ever criticized you, and your brain repackaged it as just being realistic. Groundbreaking, terrifying, totally relatable. Number 7. Some people don't have one at all. Okay, pause. Because this is where things get genuinely weird, and also where a significant portion of the population finds out they've been living a fundamentally different inner life than everyone around them, with absolutely no idea. Some people have no inner monologue. None. Zero. Silence. When you tell them to hear that voice in your head, they look at you like you just described a superpower. Because for them, thinking doesn't come with narration. It comes with feelings, impressions, images, abstract shapes of meaning, but not words. Not sentences. Not a sarcastic little commentator editorializing every life decision. Just quiet. This phenomenon got a cultural moment a few years ago when a Twitter thread went viral and basically caused a mass identity crisis across the entire internet. People were discovering in real time that their partners, siblings, and coworkers were experiencing consciousness in a completely different format. Some people were thrilled. You mean that voice that won't shut up is optional? Others were horrified. You mean some of you are just out here thinking in vibes? The scientific term for variation in inner experience is called anendophasia, for those without inner speech, and researchers like Russell Hurlbert, who studies what he calls pristine inner experience, found through careful sampling studies that people's inner lives are radically more varied than anyone assumed. Some people think in images, some in feelings, some in abstract spatial concepts, some in full dramatic monologue. And most people have no idea their way isn't the universal way. So the next time you assume everyone else hears a little voice narrating their shower thoughts, know that some people are in there doing abstract interpretive dance and calling it cognition. Number 6. It changes depending on who you're about to talk to. You ever notice that the voice in your head shifts right before you walk into a room? You're about to call your mom, and suddenly your internal monologue sounds slightly more patient and slightly more exhausted. You're about to present to your boss and the voice gets clipped, formal, weirdly professional, like it's also putting on business casual. You're about to text your best friend and suddenly your thoughts are just lowercase chaos with no punctuation. This is not a coincidence. And it's not just adjusting your communication style. Something deeper is happening. Psychologists who study inner speech in social contexts have found that our internal voice is highly anticipatory. It rehearses conversations, pre-lives interactions, and starts code switching before you even open your mouth. Which means the voice isn't just reflecting who you are. It's reflecting who you expect to be in the next 5 minutes. It's running simulations, drafting scripts, casting you in a role before the scene even starts. This is called dialogic thinking. The idea that inner speech is inherently social, shaped by imagined audiences even when you're completely alone. Mikhail Bakhtin, a Russian philosopher who sounds like a villain in a Cold War film but is actually just very smart, argued that all thought is fundamentally dialogic, meaning we never really think alone because our thoughts are always shaped by the voices, expectations, and relationships we've absorbed over a lifetime. So when your inner voice shifts before a phone call, it's not performing. It's actually revealing something true, that your personality isn't one fixed thing. It's a collection of relational selves, each with their own vocabulary, their own tone, their own slightly different version of you, which is either a profound insight about human identity or a polite way of saying you're a different person depending on who's watching. Number 5. It can gaslight you. This is probably the most unsettling item on this list, so buckle up, or don't. Your inner voice will tell you whatever you want to hear either way. Your inner monologue lies to you, constantly, and the particularly devious part is that it lies with your own voice, which makes fact-checking nearly impossible. Here's how it works. You've made a decision, maybe a bad one. Let's say you've spent $30 on something genuinely unnecessary. Before the guilt can even fully form, the inner voice is already building a defense. Asterisk, you've been stressed. You deserved it. It was basically on sale. Other people spend more. This is fine. Asterisk, by the time the thought cycle is complete, you feel not just justified but practically responsible. You didn't indulge. You invested in your well-being. Psychologists call this self-serving cognitive bias, but the mechanism that delivers it is your inner monologue, acting less like a neutral narrator and more like a defense attorney on retainer. It selectively frames events, reorders timelines, softens your role in conflicts, amplifies your role in successes, and does all of this so smoothly that it registers not as spin, but as memory. And here's the part that earns it the gaslighting label. It doesn't just lie about the present. It retroactively rewrites the past. Studies on memory consolidation show that the stories we tell ourselves about our own history literally reshape how memories are stored. Meaning your inner monologue's version of events becomes, neurologically, the version of events. The original is gone. What's left is the edited cut your inner voice approved. Essentially, your inner monologue is a PR team that also controls the archive. And it has been doing this your whole life unsupervised with no external audit. Totally fine. Everything is fine. Number 4. It might be running on a time delay. Here's a question nobody asks because the answer is too destabilizing. When you decide to do something, and then your inner voice narrates that decision, which one came first? You'd assume the decision did. Obviously. You think, therefore you act. That's just basic logic and also the entire foundation of human free will. Except neuroscientist Benjamin Libet ran a now-famous experiment in the 1980s that politely suggested free will might want to sit down. Participants were asked to flick their wrist whenever they felt like it, while tracking the moment they consciously decided to move. Brain scanners measured neural activity the whole time. The result was uncomfortable. The brain was already preparing to move, measurably electrically, up to half a second before the participant consciously decided to do it. The decision, as far as the conscious mind was concerned, came after the brain had already made its move. Which means what felt like a choice might have been more like a press release, your conscious mind being informed of a decision that had already been made somewhere deeper, and then narrating it as if it was in charge the whole time. Your inner monologue, in other words, may not be the captain. It might be the spokesperson. The captain is somewhere below deck, wordless and fast, making decisions in milliseconds and then handing a script upstairs with the note. Say you chose this. Now, researchers have pushed back on Libet's conclusions. The brain is complex, the study has limits, and free will is fake, is probably too clean a takeaway. But the underlying point stands. The relationship between your inner voice and your actual decision-making is not the clean top-down flow you imagine it to be. The narration and the action are not always in sync. Sometimes the voice is just running behind, commentating on a play it didn't call. Which, honestly, explains a lot about every impulsive decision you've ever made and then immediately tried to justify with a very confident internal monologue. Number 3. It borrows other people's voices without permission. Think about the last time you were about to do something slightly risky or outside your comfort zone. Quit something, say something honest, try something new. Now think about what the voice in your head said. Whose tone did it have? Because there's a decent chance it wasn't entirely yours. One of the more quietly disturbing findings in inner speech research is how thoroughly our internal monologue is populated by other people. Not in a supernatural way, in a deeply psychological, completely mundane way that is somehow worse. The critical voice often sounds like the most critical person from your childhood. The encouraging voice, if you have one, often carries the warmth of whoever made you feel safe early in life. The catastrophizing voice tends to sound suspiciously like whoever catastrophized most around you growing up. Vygotsky, a developmental psychologist who had a lot of correct opinions and not nearly enough time to share them, argued that inner speech itself develops from external speech, that children literally internalize the voices of caregivers and gradually transform them into private thought. Your inner monologue, by this account, didn't originate inside you. It started outside you, was spoken by other people, and then slowly migrated inward until it sounded like your own. Which means that voice telling you you're not ready, or that you'll embarrass yourself, or that you should probably just stay home, that might not be wisdom. That might be an impression. A long-running, deeply embedded impression of someone who said that to you once 20 years ago, in a tone you never forgot and a context you can barely remember. The inner monologue isn't just a reflection of who you are. It's a fossil record of everyone who ever influenced you, and some of them are still talking. Number 2. It gets louder when you try to silence it. Meditation apps have made a lot of money from the promise that you can quiet the inner voice. And to their credit, the research does support mindfulness as a useful tool. But there's a catch, and the catch is almost insultingly ironic. The moment you try not to think about something, your brain assigns a part of itself to monitor whether you're successfully not thinking about it, which requires thinking about it constantly, in the background, like a security guard whose entire job is to stand outside a door and make sure nobody opens it. Except by doing that job, they're the one who can't stop looking at the door. Psychologist Daniel Wegner called this ironic process theory, and he demonstrated it with what became one of psychology's most famous party tricks. Tell someone not to think about a white bear. Just for 1 minute. Don't think about a white bear. Simple. Except they will think about a white bear approximately 400 times in 60 seconds, because the suppression instruction and the monitoring process are a feedback loop that basically generates white bears on demand. Apply this to your inner monologue and the picture gets darker. The more desperately you try to silence the voice, the anxious spiral, the cruel loop, the 2 a.m. highlight reel of failures, the more robustly your brain monitors for that exact content. Suppression doesn't delete the thought. It puts it on repeat with a spotlight on it. The counterintuitive solution psychologists actually recommend: stop fighting it. Acknowledge the thought, observe it without engaging it, and let it pass without treating it like a verdict. Which sounds impossibly zen until you try it and find that, annoyingly, it sort of works. Your inner voice gets loud because you're arguing with it. The moment you stop treating it like an enemy and start treating it like a cloud passing through, it moves faster. Not because you won, but because you finally stopped feeding it. Number 1. It might not be you. And that's actually good news. Here's the part where everything comes together into something slightly less terrifying. If your inner monologue has a different vocabulary than you do, borrows other people's voices, lies to you about the past, runs on a delay, shifts depending on who you're about to talk to, and gets louder the more you try to mute it, then the obvious conclusion is, this voice is not a pure expression of your authentic self. It's a construction. A noisy, opinionated, deeply personalized construction, but a construction nonetheless. And that's actually the most freeing thing modern psychology has to offer. Because if the voice isn't you, if it's a mix of absorbed influences, predictive simulations, internalized critics, and narrative post hoc justifications, then you are not obligated to believe everything it says. You don't have to accept its verdicts as truth. You don't have to treat its worst moments as your defining ones. The voice that says you're not enough, that you'll fail, that everyone noticed, that it's too late, that's not the voice of reality. That's a character, a very method actor who's been in the role so long they've forgotten they're performing. Cognitive behavioral therapy is built on exactly this insight. The thoughts are not facts. They're events in the mind, observable, passable, and most importantly, questionable. When you start relating to your inner monologue as something that happens to you rather than something that is you, the whole dynamic shifts. You gain a kind of authorial distance. You can hear the voice without becoming it. You've been living with this internal roommate your whole life. You've never questioned their lease. You've just assumed they must have authority because they're inside your head and they know all your passwords. But here's the thing about a roommate you never agreed to live with, who uses a vocabulary you didn't choose, who sounds like people from your past, who lies occasionally and catastrophizes often and sometimes speaks before you've even made a decision. You're allowed to question them. You're allowed to disagree. And you're allowed to wonder, maybe for the first time, which one of you is actually running the place. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.